So we come back this morning sa subject that we've been dealing some time ago, and that is how are we to understand anger, and anger from or through the eyes of scriptures, no? And so far sa atong nakita kaning anger, we look into key passages or texts of scriptures that really addresses the issue about anger. And crucial nga text is found sa Ephesians chapter 4, where the Apostle Paul says in Ephesians 4, "Be angry and yet do not sin. Do not let the sun go down in your anger." And then he said something that, "And give opportunity to the devil." So, una, atong establish from this text nga about anger, nga anger is neither sinful nor justifiable. So, that's the first thing. So, we are not going to, every time we're angry, we are not going to conclude that my anger must really be justifiable. It's going to be justifiable kung righteous yung anger. But anger can also be, other than righteous, it can also be sinful. And in our experience, makita niyo na to how even a righteous anger can easily slide to become a sinful anger. Now, knowing these things, no? If anger is neither sinful nor justifiable, then it follows then nga very important nga mahibawaan na to. How can we tell the difference between a sinful anger and an anger that's righteous and therefore justifiable? And knowing the difference, being able to tell whether this anger is justifiable or it's sinful, leads us also to come to know how are we to handle anger. So, we dili ta ka-handle sa tong anger unless we know and be able to tell kung ang atong anger ba is sinful or righteous. Kung righteous anger, naasay pa maagi unsa ang pag-handle siya, unsa ang pag-express. Pero kung atong anger is sinful, then there's also what we are told to do, how we are going to handle a sinful anger. But bottom line is, importante nga makadiscern ta, no? So, the first thing then to tell us whether our anger is righteous or sinful, we look into Psalm 4, and nakita nato dito nga anger is righteous in the example of David's anger in Psalm 4 when it is factual and it's also handled in a controlled way. Factual siya. In other words, di lang siya something imagine, no? But rather nga you can really tell what happened and what specifically what wrong imo nakita. And in the case of David, na yung mga slander coming from his enemies. They are out to destroy his good name. That's Psalm 4, no? But also, it's not only nga i-identify ni David ang what's making him angry, and makita po nato how he acted himself in the light of that anger. So, we have seen na he made it a matter of prayer to God. Yes, ang i-control ang yang tongue niya, nga di siya makasulting anything, nga he would sin against God and sin against others. Tapos nagpadayon siya pag-worship sa God and rejoice and even continue to sleep and live in peace. So, muna ito nakita sa Psalm 4, no? With respect to anger. We know that our anger is righteous when it is factual and it's also handled in a controlled, in a biblical, in a godly, or in a Christian way. Okay? Then secondly, nakita po nato, one way we can tell whether our anger is righteous or sinful or justifiable is that whenever in our anger we are holding to grudges, no? Or we say grudges, okay? Or some kind of vindictiveness towards the person whom we perceive who has done wrong to us. Muna yun si Paul, do not let the sun go down in your anger. In other words, dapat anta imo din siyang gi-confront, gi-rebuke, bring this out to the open, and being tentative, possible baka nagkamali lang ko, pero it's bothering me, and as far as akong pagtanaw, this is what happened, and I have been wrong by what you have done, by what you have said, and if you are willing to admit the wrong, I am prepared to forgive you or grant you forgiveness right here and then. Pero kung dili na mo ito response, ato siyang i-file sa cabinet na to, no? And diya sa itong filing cabinet, balik-balikan na to, atong kalimtan, di ba? Natas pa cabinet, atong kalimtan, tapos na napi-insidente ni tabo, and hunduman na po nato, atong pagitanaw, mura ni siya usa ka kanang splinter of wood ba sa lugsog sa kamot bitaw nga gamay kay siya imo nang gi-ignore, pero every time nga marab gani sakit na pud siya, no? Hantod nga gapula na ni fester na nahimo na siya infected na, mo po ka ng grudge bali nga imong gi-hold, gi-keep nimo, and it becomes infected, it fester, it now becomes bitterness, resentment, and even desire to get vengeance, or that's vindictiveness. And whenever we see that our anger is evidencing that holding of grudges, no, then that anger is sinful. Okay, sinful siya. Wala na kaduda-duda. At the same time, it's also self-destructive. Harmful po siya. Dili siya maayos para sa imuha. Even if ikaw mo'y nasadaan o nasuko ka, tapos ang imong kasuko, nahimo na siya into a grudge, wala mo gidil, imo nang giluom siya, that anger that sinful anger is now going to become self-destructive. Self-destructive na ang anger. You remember what Job chapter 5 verse 2, unsa gisulti ni Job, Job 5 verse 2. Ingon si Job, let me say, just look at surely vexation or resentment or irritation kills the fool, and jealousy slays the simple. Or Proverbs 19 verse 19 says also the same thing. Proverbs 19 verse 19, and it says here, a man of great wrath will pay the penalty, for if you deliver him, you will only have to do it again. So I do not say penalty, whatever that penalty, we will not go into detail, but the Bible does present that sinful anger, that holding of grudges, that resentment and bitterness, which can lead to vindictiveness. It says here na harmful siya, destructive siya, sa imo, no? Now, I gave an assignment na to research unsa may effect sa anger, sinful anger sa person, no? What are the negative, ill effects, harmful effects of a sinful anger upon the person? Physically, mentally, emotionally, psychologically, in other words, the total well-being of the person. Kinsay makahatag. Just mention one or two. Lack of sleep, very obvious siya, no? Yung katulog, insomnia ka. And simply, kung mag-insomnia ka, unsa effect ka niya na, daga effect sa health. Ay imong BP mo taas, di ba? Aburido ka, irritable ka. Okay, what else? Okay, high blood pressure. Apil na siya. Okay, unsa pa? Others? Dito. What? Loss of focus. What is that you mean? Loss of focus. Tinuod siya. No? Dili na ka makakonsentrate. Ang imong thoughts, wala sa imong ginabuhat. Layo kaayo. No? Because it's nag-simmer siya inside. No? It's drawing all attention inside. And at the same time, all the forces are being poured upon inside sa imo. Ang imong utok di mapugang, gadagandagang, gadiwain, no? So unsa pa? That's part sa effect. Unsa pa? What's that? Irritable. So unsa nga aspect sa tong humanity ang irritability? Emotion ato emotional health, no? Medyo negative ta sa atong emotional health nato. Okay? Unsa pa? Oh. Okay, so stress hormones bali affecting physically at the same time emotionally, no? Tiresome na, exhausted ka, not only physically but also emotionally, no? Kay madrain ang imong battery. Okay, unsa pa? What's that? Low performance. Okay. Oh. So, affecting sa imong performance bali na kay not only reduce imong concentration and you begin to make poor judgment, no? Tungod kay ang imong hunahuna, your whole being is being sucked inside. All the juices nga dapat unta imong hatag sa imong trabaho naka-focus sa sulod. Okay, unsa pa? Okay, so in terms of mental sharpness, one example of physical effect of anger. Okay, so what's that again? Imong judgment, what's that? Cloudy imong judgment, okay? So, what about one of the effects sa physical is kanang nakaproblema sa siyang digestive problems. Medyo, sige siyang LBM or naka-hyper acidity siya. O naka-ulcer, problema na, dako na problema, no? Gamay rin tayong problema na dako na, no? Sa emotional effects, aside sa resentment, bitterness, na po irritability, no? Joylessness, nasad. What about sa mental? Itong poor judgment, no? Ang imong concentration, low level imong concentration. Imong pamina, imong thinking, medyo dili straight, distorted siya, no? Sa psychological effects na ba? Psychologically, kanang anxiety, no? Ang you feel a kind of heightened state of tension. Maski pag wala kagibuhat, pero medyo yung breathing fast, no? Yung huna-huna, kusog kayo, then maybe you begin to sweat sa imong palms, pero wala kagibuhat, no? There's a heightened state of attention. Depression. Okay? Dayon, it can also lead into some behaviors that become addictive. Kaya nga naman, kanang gitawag of na problema, and to avoid facing your true feelings, ang buhaton nimo na kay feelings of unresolved anger, but naasa na wala niyo ma-resolve and you don't find a way nga ma-resolve siya, you just want to go into an escape out of that reality, no? And what do people do to escape out of their reality? Nga makalimot sila, nga malingaw sila lain butang. Sa buhaton actually, sa buhaton nila. To what do they turn to? Alcohol, substance abuse, drugs and alcohol, no? Or entertainment, no? To numb the pain or the anger. Or possibly mag-daydreaming siya, no? Nga mo ni ang reality dili exactly yung sa nakita sa tubangan niya, no? Or sometimes people can even respond in a way nga they become very joker sila, no? Excessive humor. Pakatawa sila, and yung kang grabe ni si Kuan, ma-enjoy kita siya. Pero kana da outlet lang da siya nga yan yung anger niya manam yung anger niya, no? Saba ka siya, loud ka siya, enjoy ka siya, but down deep inside niya puno siya anger, no? Escapism. So ang iyang ginabuhat bali sa gawas usa lang ka mas sa iyang hurt ay og mga disappointment niya, no? Aduna siya mga emotional and psychological effects, and there's a wide range, no? Some people silang anger leads them to always going back sa refrigerator. Sige sila kaon, no? Yut kaon sila. Tense na po sila, and then ang ilang outlet ang refrigerator, nagka mga obese. Some buta sabot kung a person obese, that's a anger issues. But that's one outlet. Others also begins to withdraw from others, isolation, no? They begin to isolate themselves, or they have an irritable attitude, volatile attitude, nga anybody nga makaduol lang sa iya masikan gyud, no? Lash out mga cutting words, cutting remarks. It's just like walking on top of a volcano. Sige ga, you just don't know asa siya mo burst out, no? Or some people in that state magiging critical sila, hypercritical, no? Na it's good to be critical, but if you're going to become critical, hypercritical, wala na kayo makita, but anan mali, na kayo masaway, na kayo complain, and those are effects of anger, no? So I think we see anger as observed clinically. Mga doctors, mga psychologists, kita sila nga ang root gidani is adunay anger issues nga wala madi. But we are not just content to look at these things clinically. We want to quote the scriptures, and what does the Bible tell us about the ill, bitter effects of anger upon the person. And then tanaw na to asa man gikan kani siya. If this is what's happening, where is its roots? So, una ang iyang example of cases where the Bible describes anger, and then it also prescribes ang iyang fruit, ayang root niya. Okay? So, let's look at 3 cases this morning as our time permits us to look at 3 instances in which a person has an unbuilt anger issue. It becomes a grudge, and tanaw na to unsay impact sa iya. Okay, turn please with me to Genesis chapter 4. Genesis chapter 4. Now Adam knew Eve his wife, and she conceived and bore Cain, saying, I have gotten a man with the help of the Lord. And again, she bore his brother Abel. Now Abel was a keeper of sheep, and Cain a worker of the ground. In the course of time, Cain brought to the Lord an offering of the fruit of the ground, and Abel also brought the firstborn of his flock and of their fat portions. And the Lord had regard for Abel and his offering, but for Cain and his offering he had no regard. So Cain was very angry, and his face fell. The Lord said to Cain, Why are you angry? And why has your face fallen? If you do well, will you not be accepted? If you do not do well, sin is crouching at the door. Its desire is contrary to you, but you must rule over it. Cain spoke to Abel his brother, and when they were in the field, Cain rose up against his brother Abel and killed him. And then let's just end up there. So here's a case to Cain. Cain had a brother Abel, almost a twin brother, kay they were just siguro seconds apart lang or minutes apart. And natapos si Cain, then natapos si Abel, and they have a different vocation of life. Si Cain was a farmer, Abel was a shepherd. And everything was okay, not until nga they begin to, at the end of the week, the Sabbath day, they come to worship God. And siguro, when they come, what are they thinking? Well, how is God going to accept me today? And si Cain, he was thinking, I'm going to bring to God that which I work out and work hard in my own effort. I'm going to bring to God the fruits of the ground. But siguro si Abel was thinking na I'm a shepherd, and I'm going to offer my sheep to God. And the book of Hebrews tells us that Abel did that out of faith. By faith, he offered to God a sacrifice in which God approves. Now, si Cain, ang iyang offering was ang iyang efforts niya. His efforts, his labor, the fruits of his labor. Now, ang response of God was, God has regard for Abel's offering, pero wala siya regard for the offerings of Cain. In other words, the offering that pleases God and makes God accept Abel and not Cain, because Abel offered a sacrifice out of faith, and a faith upon looking back in Genesis 3 about the one who's going to come, who would be sacrificed, who will be bruised in the process, but will redeem God's people. And the response of God, unsa hitabo, adunay impact sila. We are told about unsa effect kang Cain. We read then in verse 5, but for Cain and his offering he had no regard, so Cain was very angry. Very angry siya, no? Para sa iya murag unfair ni, no? Insa nga this is wrong, no? So iyang gibati ang anger. Na unsa ka ng anger? Anger is the hot displeasure of the soul in response to a perceived wrong. That's our definition. He felt angry. Now, pangutan ko, when he was angry, and it's not just a one event, it's an anger that went on day after day, week after week, and God was pleased with Abel, but God has no regard for Cain. Unsa effect sa iya Unsa effect sa anger kang Cain? He is very angry, and unsa effect? Nag-grudge siya, but aside from that, look at the text, verse 5. Let's not miss this important detail. Genesis 4, verse 5. His face or countenance fell. Sa ibot pasabot, ana? Nahugno ang iyang entire demeanor, no? Nawala ang iyang smiling face. Na sour ang iyang face, no? Now, he began to live day by day with a long face. Namugkot na siya. Every time siya mo worship sa God, yung face niya, makita gini mo nga suko siya. Or now, when you see a person like that, what's that showing? How would you describe that? What is his emotional state? Depressed, I think that's the word nga gamit karon. He went through a depression. Depression siya. And again, depression. There's kabalaka, adunay mga irritation, irritability, volatile yung spirit niya, no? But miserable siya. The point is, his anger, which had become a sinful anger, led to a state of depression. Now God confronted him about it. Verse 6, the Lord said to Cain, why are you angry, and why has your face fallen? If you do well, will you not be accepted? If you do not do well, sin is crouching at the door, its desire is contrary to you, but you must rule over it. So, depressed ka, pero there's a way to handle your moods swing. You got to take control of it, turn it around, do the right thing. Sometimes the feeling is not easy to turn around, but you just do what's right, God says, and then the feelings will just follow. He's not willing to do things right. He continues to do the same wrong thing, and no wonder why he cannot turn away his depression. So he became depressed, and then ultimately, that depression led him to what? To commit what? Murder. So yang gipatay si Abel. Now again, no? Bantay ta kay kaning depression born out of an anger that's not being dealt with. Ang yang long-term result niya, kung dili siya maagapan gani, dili siya mag-repent, dili niya turn around, it's going to lead into murder. And where does murder come from? According to James, it comes from the hatred, the bitterness, and these things are not dealt with, and it lead into a murderous act. No? So that's one case. Another case, 2 Samuel. 2 Samuel chapter 13, verse 21. Now, this is a very saddening incident involving mga anak ni David, na siya mga anak na lalaki, coming from different wives. Dahil po siya anak na babae, coming also from different wives. No? Now, si David, in one of his wife, aduna siya'y anak nga usa si Absalom, and then aduna po siya igsuon nga si Tamar, biological sister niya. And 2 Samuel 13 recounts the account in which si Tamar was raped by David's eldest son Amnon, a son with another wife. In other words, step-brother niya. Ug iyang gi-rape niya ang iyang step-sister. To cut the story short, no? And after adto, Tamar was dishonored, and Absalom learned about it. Verse 20. And her brother Absalom said to her, "Has Amnon your brother been with you? Now hold your peace, my sister. He is your brother. Do not take this to heart." So Tamar lived a desolate woman in her brother Absalom's house. When King David heard all of these things, he was very angry. But Absalom spoke to Amnon, neither good nor bad, for Absalom hated Amnon because he had violated his sister. So here, kabalo si Absalom sa gibuhat sa iyang stepbrother, sa iyang igsoon nga babae, nasuko siya. Nasuko siya kang Amnon. Napangutana ba, ang iyang kasuko ba, righteous ba? Tama lang, masuko siya. Baglagot siya, no? Puno siya hatred or an anger that demands retribution. Pero what happened here, dili lang ang gibuhat ni Amnon sa iyang igsoon, nakasuko no doubt ka Absalom. When their father David confronted Amnon, I think si David wala po niya buhat ang punishment kag Amnon, because si Amnon was the eldest son. He was believed to be an heir to the throne. At least that's what people at that time are thinking. Munang kumpiyansa kay siya. So here's what Amnon did. Gi-violate niya ang sister ni Absalom. Dayon wala pa di punishment. Siguro si Absalom dad, nga wala man mo sa gi-punish. So, all the more, dinhi, sa kang Absalom, puno siya anger, and it says here, Absalom spoke to Amnon neither good nor bad, for Absalom hated Amnon because he had violated his sister Tamar. He spoke to Amnon neither good nor bad. Sibot pasabutan na. He spoke to Amnon neither good or bad. How would you describe that? Nunoy? Naghilom ra siya. Naghilom ra siya, no? And yet, sa iyang paghilom niya, gingon din Absalom hated Amnon. So, here's a person who is holding a grudge, a resentment, and he's just silent. He's refusing to have anything to say. Wala siya gisulti nga sa kasuko niya. Wala po siya gisulti nga all is well. Yang gibuhat is tagaan niya si Amnon of silent treatment, cold shoulder. Now, Absalom show an example to us that one way in which a grudge is held in the heart, while to others it makes them become depressed, to Amnon it leads him to act by treating those people with silent treatment, with cold shoulder, not speaking, just giving total silence. Now, where did it all lead at the end? Well, what happened then, as the story shows, that at one time, iyang gi-invite ang tanang mga igsuon niya, mga step brothers niya sa iyang balay, mag-party. And then, during that party, to si Amnon, na siya plano nga ipapatay niya si Amnon. And it says in verse 33, now therefore let not my lord the king so take it to heart to suppose that all the king's sons are dead, for Amnon alone is dead. Minsan pa ba niya, ayaw kabalaka, wala ko hilati uban. Si Amnon ra, no? And so Amnon fled, so on and so forth. So, again, no? Depression niya, silent treatment, but just the same, it led to the same conclusion, murder. Then one more case in 1 Samuel 18 verse 1. 1 Samuel 18 verse 1, the case of King Saul. Verse 1, as soon as he had finished speaking to Saul, that is David, speaking to Saul, see, David at this time killed Goliath, no? Gave victory sa nation sa Israel. And so, ang yang profile niya, ni dako na. Nailhan na siya sa kadaghanan. And King Saul na, cannot ignore him. Nailan niya si David. So, pauta na, kinsa man ka? Kinsa man imong papa nimo, no? And then in chapter 18, as soon as he had finished speaking to Saul, the soul of Jonathan was knit to the soul of David, and Jonathan loved him as his own soul. In other words, si Jonathan, anak siya ni King Saul. Pagkita niya kay David, grabe si David, yung gibuhat niya, and he did it out of his faith upon God. This is the man that I like to be my friend. So, na-close sila. Then Jonathan made a covenant with David because he loved him as his own. And Jonathan stripped himself of the robe that was on him and gave it to David, and his armor, and even his sword, and his bow, and his belt. And David went out and was successful wherever Saul sent him. So, tagaan na nag-roll si David sa yung army, no? And dito mo raid sa Pikas, and David really is leading his army to victory. So that Saul set him apart over the men of the war, And this was good in the sight of all the people also, and in the sight of Saul's servants. So, dili lang si Saul, nakita niya ang potential ni David. Mga tao, nakita nila, even ang mga official ni David siyang army, wala sila objection na si David, himuon o keep figure, no? They all agreed. Now, here's what happened. One afternoon perhaps, as they were coming home, when David returned from striking down the Philistine, the women came out of all the cities of Israel singing and dancing to meet King Saul with tambourines, with songs of joy, and with musical instruments. And the women sang to one another as they celebrated, Saul has struck down his thousands, and David his 10,000s. And Saul was very angry. And this saying displeased him. He said, they ascribe to David 10,000s, and to me they have ascribed thousands, and what more can he have but a kingdom? And Saul eyed David from that day on. Okay, so I think the story is very straightforward, no? Na David begins to earn the trust not only of King Saul but upon the whole nation. He became popular, hero. And so, King Saul okay na sa iya. After all, he's doing the job for him. Not until nga pag-uli, nakita niya ang popularity ni David ni Saul pagtaas kaysa iya. Sa pa na, ang poll survey. Si King Saul, 40%. Si David, naabot ng 80%. When he heard about it, he became very jealous, envious, begin to become insecure nga baka si David, sila matao, himuon siyang king, dili na ako. And so because of that, ang sige sulti din we read then that Saul begins to eye David from that day on. What does it mean to eye David? Lahi na ang iyang pananaw kan David, di na sama sa una nga confident siya o nagsalig siya. This time, nakita niya David nga suspicious na siya. He could be a threat to my throne. Bantayan ko ni siya. Dapat ang iyang popularity ako ma-pull down. And you know the rest of the story. What King Saul did is he made many attempts to destroy David, to kill David, to murder him. In other words, he began to look at David with an evil eye. And he began to plot to find anything that's going to dishonor David, that's going to put him in a situation nga people will lose confidence sa iya. In other words, he became disaffected. Disaffected na siya. And when the heart is disaffected, he begins to look at David and construct all his actions as coming out from an evil motive to take the crown from his head. So gaplano na siya, no? And thankfully, ang iyang attempt to silence David, eliminate David, murder David, did not succeed. But rather, David later on became the king in Israel after King Saul. Now, in these three cases, makita nato na whenever there's anger, an anger that turned to become a deep resentment and grudge, not only nga it can lead one to become depressed, or it can lead one to just treat others with silent treatment, cold shoulder, ignoring, avoiding, or perhaps you want to see to it na that person never gets your attention. And sometimes it also includes that you begin to look at with jealousy, with suspicion, and you want to plot something. You can undermine the person, or you can exclude the person and let that person suffer. These are the harmful, sinful effects of a sinful anger. And notice here, whether the immediate effect is depression, whether it is silent treatment, whether it's with a disaffected eye or heart, at the end, it all lead into murder. It all lead into murder. Now, murder, by the way, it's not just a murderous act, but it can also be a murderous thoughts. So, muna-una, oy, naku gusto buhaton kaning a person, baka siya matangtang na sa diana. I can get this person out of my life. Murderous thoughts. Or it can be murderous words. And it can even lead into murderous actions. That's the fruit or effects of sinful anger. Now, asa man nagikan siya? No? When these things are going on, where is the root? What's at the bottom of this kind of sinful anger? Turn please with me to Leviticus 19, 17 to 18. Leviticus 19, 17 to 18. You shall not hate your brother in your heart, but you shall reason frankly with your neighbor, lest you incur sin because of him. You shall not take vengeance or bear a grudge against the sons of your own people, but you shall love your neighbor as yourself. I am the Lord. Now, here, dini, gi-contrast ang duha ka butang. Gi-contrast ang love o ang hatred. No? Love and hatred. Now, when you have love, that is to say nga wala kay hatred sa imong heart, what do you do? How do you handle love in the face of wrong done? God says, here's what love does. You shall reason frankly with your neighbor. In other words, you go out, make a private, personal, gracious, loving confrontation. Where necessary, rebuking. Pero if instead of love, what you have is, he describes it as vindictiveness, vengeance, and describe it as grudges, God's bearing, so that in your action you don't confront the person, you just withdraw from the person, you swallow and salt in your depression, naka-depress ka, or Nagpalayo ka, pero pananaw nimo, laing kay pananaw nimo, no? Silent treatment. It says, and God says, that when that is what you do to the wrong down that you perceive, yung sama na siya. God says, it's hatred. It's hatred. You cannot just simply gloss it and try to romanticize it. Okay naman ni siya, wala naman ni siya. And it's either you love the person or you hate the person. Now, ang punta na kayo is that what do you have right now? Do you have love or do you have hatred? If we are wrong. Now, you know that you have love because when you are wrong, you reason openly and frankly with your neighbor. But if what you have is hatred, muna ni nga, you're going to become depressed. You begin to show silent treatment, or you're going to become disaffected and never do something to resolve the issue. You just bottle them up. And you go through day by day, depressed, disaffected, and avoiding the person, treating him with a cold shoulder. God is saying, what you have is nothing less but hatred. And that's the truth of it. And you know what, brethren? And sometimes itong problema nato is that dili ta willing mo admit nga mo ginada siya. Hinta nga, well, kuha man good kay murag dili ko prepared. Or I admit nga hadlo ko. Or pasensyado lang ko, ako pasagdala ako na mawala. Whatever else that you say. Cowardice, ill-prepared ko, whatever God says, that's hatred. Hatred. And that's not love. That is what at the root of your anger, that's sinful, that lead one to act in these ways, because what you have is that you have hatred in your heart. And you know what, brethren, if makita nimo nga modern na siya, there's a way to resolve that hatred in your heart. And that is first of all to come before God, to admit it. God, I'm trying to avoid this issue. I'm trying to delay. I know what I have is hatred in my heart. God, deliver me from this hatred. Cleanse my heart, Lord. Make me to have the courage to go and bring this out to the open so that it can then be put away from us and we all can move on. He can move on. I can move on. And so, God, forgive and grant me the grace to be able to do this. So we have seen, brethren, na mo kani ang anger, it is sinful when that anger is bottled up, held up as a grudge, and you never do anything about it. Instead, you allow it to affect you, not just affect you physically, emotionally, psychologically, relationally, but also that you allow it to affect you by becoming depressed, by having a cold shoulder treatment to the person, and even to have a disaffected attitude towards the person. That anger is not righteous, but it's sinful. And not only sinful, it is also destructive. You will be destroyed by it. Others will be hurt, you will be hurt, and that's why you better have to deal with that issue that you have before God and before men. Okay, so I think that's all for this morning. Our time is up. Any comment or addition? Yep. Genesis 6 verse 6. And the Lord regretted that he had made man on the earth, and it grieved him to his heart. So the Lord said, I will blot out man whom I have created from the face of the land, for I am sorry that I have made them. So, ang question is,
did God also experience depression?
okay.
Just like Cain, Absalom, and
Soul.
because of the actions of what did God also experience depression at the time? He made pronouncement of blotting out King of the
Now, remember, anger can be sinful or it can be righteous. And God's anger is righteous. There's no element of vindictiveness on the part of God, but it's God's holy righteousness, holy justice, bali, why He lead him to act and to punish the sin. So there's a big difference sa anger sa God. And we're going to see, not only in Genesis chapter 6, we're going to see what God did to the Egyptians, and what God did to the Amorites, and what God did to the people of Israel in their sin. And very brutal, very violent ang judgment sa God. Now, was God depressed? Maybe it's not depressed, but God has a holy affections towards, or holy reaction towards sin. Jesus was a sinless man, and he was grieved. I think that's Mark 4. Grieved because of the rejection of the people of Israel. He was grieved, and it says with anger he looked at them. Now, anger is holy and righteous, but not so with us. Alex, what? Kano sana sinful to anger? Yes, because we're made in the image of God. Na dapat sana when God made our first parents, they were created in the image of God, and when temptation came, we could have expected them to feel a revulsion against the suggestion that disobey God and are going to become just like God. But instead, part of their fall into sin was they were not angry over something that God is angry about. And so they took the temptation. Na amo na to problema na to, na sometimes we're angry, perhaps many times angry over something that God is not angry. But na po times God is so angry about our sin, and yet to us, it's just no big deal. Now, that's what happened at the fall of man. So that I would say ang fall did not only begin with the act, it already began down deep inside, that they were not acting in a righteous anger. Instead, they were giving in to sinful anger. Last question. Yes. 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 Now, by the way, si Christ was also tempted. Pero when the temptation came, began Satan, or he rejected Satan's temptation. It's not sinful to be tempted, no? Pero ang case itong first parents, they were tempted and they choose to yield onto the temptation rather than to resist the temptation. Okay, so with that, let's close with a word of prayer. Rita, Lord, this morning we are reminded how much we need your grace to be at work in us, to continually transform us, that we would become more and more like you in your anger against sin, righteous anger. And our prayer that as we have this truth before us, knowing that you have given to us your Holy Spirit, He works in us, that the things that unconverted people are vulnerable to and exposed to, salamat nga, we have a power greater than our own resolutions. The Holy Spirit of God is in us, strengthening us, reminding us and guiding us to resist from falling into a sinful anger. We don't put confidence upon ourselves. We look up to you in Jesus' name. Amen.